Hey everyone, thank you for joining us this Wednesday. We're going to do some things a little different this evening. We're going to kind of ask some of the real spiritual questions that we all really need to know the answer to. Some of these have been sent to us, some of these we've created ourselves, but we're just going to join in with you today in this theological decathlon here. So we're just going to do some brief introductions if you don't know everybody. We'll start here.
My name is Zandy. I'm the youth pastor here at Lakeside.
Hey everybody, I'm Justin. I'm one of the associate pastors here.
I am Brittany. I am the live experience director. Did I say that right? Yay. All right.
job.
Live experience director here at Lakeside.
I'm Brandon. I'm the next gen pastor.
And I'm Kane. I am the live broadcast director.
So we're going to start things off a little light, but still asking the really spiritual questions that we really need to know the answer to. So the first one we kind of discussed as a group, and it's something that's kind of there's a chasm in the Christian community on this one.
That's facts.
It's really divisive in believers, but it's which one is greater, Chick-fil-A or Zaxby's? So does anyone want to start on that?
I'd love to start, actually. If you say anything other than Chick-fil-A, realistically, I think I would have to question your salvation.
Preach, preach.
I think Chick-fil-A is king, especially since they added the mac and cheese. They just have the best chicken, the best service. I'm not a morning person. You guys know that. But when I go to Chick-fil-A in the morning, they make me happy to be alive. And I love Chick-fil-A, and I think it's the GOAT. So if you're struggling with that, you can come to one of us. We would love to pray with you. Whatever.
I think Kane may have a different opinion on this.
Actually, no, I agree with her. Chick-fil-A
Oh.
is the GOAT.
Okay.
When I moved to Eastman about a year ago, the number one thing I miss, my family lives in Dublin. There's all kind of stuff. Chick-fil-A is left a hole in my heart by not being here in Eastman with us. I would give anything to get one of those breakfast bowls in the morning time while on the way to
Those are
work,
the
because
best,
I used to
man.
get them every morning when I went to the bank in Dublin. So now I just have to make do with like Pop-Tarts and crap. So, it is what it is. But Chick-fil-A, definitely, hands down, over Zaxby's.
Okay, so I am also in agreement. Man, this was, we're not really discussing,
One mind and one
debating.
accord.
We are discussing.
One mind, one accord. Now, obviously that was kind of more of a joke question, but we're going to get into some more serious topics. If Brandon wants to just interject there.
Before we say that, I do want to say I think we all can agree we need Chick-fil-A in Eastman.
But we also can agree that Zaxby's Cheddar Bites trumps a lot of things.
Come on, that's
The
right.
Cheddar Bites, listen here.
I don't disagree because those are fire, but I would much rather Chick-fil-A sponsor this.
That's true.
When
Chick-fil-A.
we go viral. So
You
Come on.
see us, you hear us.
Give us the free stuff.
At Chick-fil-A.
I need 7 cups of mac and cheese tomorrow.
Also,
Yes.
Chick-fil-A always dyes their lemonade green for St. Patty's, and that's my heart.
Man,
so
Chick-fil-A lemonade. You're making me
They
Oh,
all about
yeah.
the community
nostalgic.
support.
They're peach
Unbeatable.
milkshakes, man.
Now, just jokingly
We're from
aside,
Georgia. That's what we love is peaches. I'm just kidding.
just jokingly aside, we just want to kind of ask some more things. Someone actually asked us, and this is a pretty good question, and we kind of have maybe some differing opinions on this, but is modesty culture hurtful or helpful to the Christian believer? So does anyone want to open up with that?
you want to specify modesty culture?
So modesty culture would be what, and from what I asked in the question here, I'm just assuming, because it was sent into us, is the idea that modesty relates to your relationship with the Lord, and that in having a relationship in the Lord, you would have some type of demeanor of modesty. Modesty being primarily a clothing attitude is the main philosophy behind it. Some people really mention. Now, you can't have a modest heart. That's probably not what they're referring to, because modesty culture is not in this term. They're not saying it's hurtful or helpful. A heart issue for modesty wouldn't be hurtful in any way. So I'm assuming they're only talking about the clothing aspect.
What do you mean? Okay, so are we talking about all together or in the church?
I would say altogether because
Yeah.
Let's do it
I
as a whole.
believe it
How
goes.
exactly would you mean that it would be hurtful? Personally to us, to our witness? What do you mean by that?
Well, see, they didn't specify on that, so that's what I was kind of thinking that we
Or
could
I
just
guess
roll
what
with
would
I
that.
mean, I
Okay,
guess you
I
could
guess
look at
it's
it
on
from
the
different perspectives, because while I feel like we can all agree that modesty and dressing appropriately is the more favorable option, in our opinion, there are a lot of people who feel like they should be able to wear what they wear And while I don't necessarily agree with that 100%, I don't agree with telling people they have to wear a certain sect. And I think that's where the damage comes in,
Okay.
where you're saying if you don't dress a certain way, if you don't look a certain way, if you don't do a certain thing, then I feel like that's damaging to the psyche of women who may want to express themselves through what they wear.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely understand that. For those of you out there who know my history or my past, I came from as I first got saved, I really didn't know much about churches and was involved in an apostolic church for a while, and they were very, very dogmatic or very, very harsh on clothing, and your appearance had very much so to do with how saved you were. If you were getting into heaven, your value to the Lord, all of that. So in that culture that I was in at that time, which I've since left, obviously, women had to wear pants. They couldn't have their hair down. They had to wear it on their head. I'm sorry, they couldn't wear pants. They had to wear dresses. They wear very, very little to no makeup. You couldn't wear jewelry. And even as far as the men, we had one gentleman that said you can only wear white shirts. Any other colored shirt was vanity. So really, really strict ideology with that. So I think there's definitely a necessity for modesty. Scripture calls for that. But how far do we go with that? I guess would be a good way of
Well,
discussing
and I think
that.
that's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, when does it become damaging to the Christian culture?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. Dude, what do you guys think?
I think that, well, to like the same with Justin, growing up with that kind of background and being told exactly how to be, and if you didn't be this, then you were not a Christian and you didn't love Jesus. And coming from now a pastor's wife with blue hair and a nose ring, it is a little bit of a different perspective for me, and I think that that's where the Christian world fails to define what modesty is. We tell people that, or not we as a collective, but Christian culture as a collective, tell people that you have to look like this cookie cutter. And if you don't look like this cookie cutter, if you have a wonky looking, arm, then the cookie beside you with the same cookie cutter, then you're not fitting the mold. You're not fitting where you're. That was so weird. You look
Nemo.
The cookie cutter.
Anyway, cookie cutter Christian
Involved in an
theory.
accident with a cookie cutter.
Bringing that into a weird time. Anyway, so I think that we need to define. I think that defining as a whole the word modesty and the way that it comes from different backgrounds and people with different ideologies, I think it really does become hurtful. I know in my personal experience being told that I had to be this or I didn't love Jesus really was detrimental to my adolescence, really was detrimental to the way that I viewed Christianity and the way that I viewed Jesus and the fact that he would not accept me if I wasn't this.
Oh, yeah.
Which made me feel unworthy and unlovable and worthless because I wasn't this. And no matter how hard I tried, I never could be this. So, yeah, I think defining it with different ideologies and pressing those ideologies on people. Of course, we need modesty, and of course, we need those things. But I think that your own conviction shouldn't be pressed so hard on other people, so much so that it takes away the person that God created and intended them to be.
Okay, I can understand. And when you say takes away the person that God intended them to be, I think the idea there is that by creating such a large, I guess, difference in ideology from, say, someone who, we grew up in this type of environment and we understand modesty, but someone who is not saved and has not been around the Christian culture or the Christian community, that's not a concept they're going to be familiar with. They're not going to be familiar with this idea of Christian modesty, and you can even stretch that to Christian morality. And I think a lot of times when people come into the church, they get these forms of systems of thinking that we have pushed on them without really knowing what it is, and it pushes them away from understanding that God is a loving God because they see all the regulatory and the religious aspects of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all boils down to we have made it so much a religious thing to be. It's another thing on the checklist. You have to look a certain way, and you have to carry yourself a certain way. And while I do agree that that is important to do, I believe that comes naturally when you convert from trying to be religious and have a checklist to having a relationship with Jesus. I believe if you focus on your relationship with Jesus and seeking after him, then he will speak to you the things that are right, the things that are good. And I believe that no religion, Christian or otherwise, can tell you exactly what to wear or how to appear. I believe that you will naturally fall into what is appropriate, what is good in God's eyes when you seek after Him. I believe that's the only way we get there without hurting someone in the process of trying to tell them how to be.
That's very good. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Any other thoughts?
I think you can look at it from a few angles. First always being, especially within the church, kind of where you're at, because obviously, as worship leaders, as pastors, I'm not going to get up here in something that's immodest because I'm presenting myself to other people from a different platform. So I think a lot of times you have to take that into perspective. Even with our youth worship team, I tell them, I don't want you to wear shorts on stage when you lead worship, because they're all kids, and they come in and they might have games or something like that, but I feel like it's just more reverent. And everybody's conviction is going to be different.
Right.
So it kind of like what you said, that comes down to your relationship with God. What does He convict you on? Now, obviously, there are some things that anybody in the world would deem inappropriate,
Right.
and so you want to be conscious not to offend someone, but not live your life afraid to.
Yes.
And you want to make sure that you're respectful of obviously anybody that might struggle. Because realistically, if I'm immodest, and let's be real, the whole conversation is mostly about women. When do you hear somebody say a guy was immodest? Probably never.
Yeah.
It's always going to be about a girl whose
mean,
dress
That
was
one
too
time with
short,
me.
or
There's
her
some of
pants
those
were too
short
tight.
shorts that guys are wearing
I know.
now. Like that are shorter
Chubbies
than
are
mine.
like they're shorter than some of the shorts I wear. But you know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
it usually comes back to women, and guys are visual people. They just are. And so if I'm teaching young girls, yeah, I'm going to teach them to be modest. I don't say your shorts have to be to the fingertip and they have to be whatever. But we go to camp and there's regulations.
Same with school,
because
yeah.
you have to be protective of your brothers and sisters around you. And I think that comes with the relationship. That's just natural conviction. Hey, I don't want to show everything I've got because I want it to be important to somebody. I don't want just everybody seeing me and knowing me in that way. And so definitely would never put stipulations. If you walk in our church, come as you are. But I feel like as you grow with the Lord, certain things like that fall into place for you. When you spend your quiet time, He begins to reveal, hey, maybe you should do this or shouldn't do this. And modesty is just one of those things that you just have to kind of work out with yourself. But it's definitely important because you don't want to disrupt or offend other people. Again, not to the point where we've been talked about for our hair or our lipstick or things that we wear on stage, and it's like I don't live for you, but at the same time I do have to respect you. You're my brother, you're my sister, and so I think it's just about being mindful mostly, but always an advocate for modest is hottest. So
Modest is hot.
So another question that we
Wait,
had. Oh, sorry,
yeah,
go
what
ahead,
about Brandon?
Brandon.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's the line when it comes to their intentions? Like when they're in youth group and their intentions are not solely focused on just coming to church, but they're wanting to impress others, and they're wanting to get that guy to look at them or that girl to look at them.
Well, realistically, they're teenagers, so most of them are.
I was gonna say that's a big
Most
modesty
of them
line
are.
there.
I can't. I'm not going to go up to a kid. Realistically, if something is actually showing, I'm going to have to go up to a kid and say, "Hey, we can't do this. Like, let's get you something else." I can't draw that line again with how long the short should be or how short the short shirt should be, or I can't do that. But there are ways to do it in love.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Realistically, they're going to come and they're going to say, I want to wear these because they're a little tighter or they fit me a little better, and I am trying to impress so-and-so, and maybe I'll find a man looking for Jesus. Well, they might be looking for Jesus, but their mind won't be on him when they see in those pants. So, so I think that's important as far as youth ministry. That's important in making sure you have time aside from just your normal services and things like that, and actually getting one-on-one with kids and talking to them about things like that, because you're going to have people that walk in the church and they have never known anything different and don't know any better, and you have to kind of get on that level and say, hey, like, let's just have an open conversation. You're gonna have people that were raised like me and Brittany that, you have to cover all of it.
If your
you know?
toenails were showing,
Exactly.
you
And
did
then you're
not
going to
love
have
Jesus.
kids that, were raised at the beach and they don't half wear anything. And
Yeah.
that's a culture thing. So I think you got to be sensitive. I don't think you can draw a definitive line, because if you do, people are going to turn away and it's going to seem legalistic.
Yeah, and I
agree.
agree with that. I think that kind of what Brandon proposed there was more of an intent of a heart question, and how does that tie in with modesty? And realistically, that's a very difficult thing to push out, because, say, even if with that mentality, a young man comes in wearing certain types of clothing or certain types of appearance to have something, his intention wearing those clothes, even though those clothes may very well be modest, may not be the purest intention of heart.
That's true.
So
That's
I think that's a good way of looking at it, is we should look more towards the intent of the heart. Are they wearing this because this is what they're culturally used to? Like let's say with the beach, unfortunately, like I said, we grew up in a very legalistic aspect when I was growing up, and Brittany was there in the same congregation with me, and our pastor said that going to the beach was a sin because there were people there who were immodest. And you could look at it like that, and unfortunately, like, you're missing out on one of the most beautiful creations that God's ever designed. To see a sunset on the beach as the waves
Can't
roar
beat
in.
it.
I mean, what else is a better fingerprint of God? Like, look what I did. Isn't that neat? Than that. That's just
Yeah.
a surreal moment. And to take that away because there's people there who might be immodest, that's just like saying I can't go to Walmart or buy stuff because there might be someone there who's not saved.
And I think it goes back to like how you started the conversation. It goes back to not even modesty as far as clothes, but modesty of your heart. Because where is my heart when I put my clothes on, when I pick what I am going to wear? And, we talk about that all the time, about, how weird it might be, but we stand in front of our closet and some of us say, hey, God, what do you want me to wear today? And I feel like when you allow that influence into your life, he speaks in all of those little things. And so where does my heart lie? Am I trying to impress somebody, or am I listening to the Lord honestly in everything that I do? Am I bringing it to Him? And I think you can't go wrong when you do that.
What you got? Just sitting over here thinking as we're talking, and I know we got other topics to cover, but do you think that as a church body, we use modesty, we throw modesty on people, on women especially? Like you said, it's more aimed towards women than men, towards girls than boys. Do you think that modesty is used to cover up a lack of teaching of young men on how to not over-sexualize females?
That's a good
That
question.
is
That's a
great.
great
It's
question.
a real
I
good
think
question.
that is a 100% yes.
I think so too.
Because I think, and this isn't against anyone in my church or anybody that I know, but pretty much anywhere you go, you hear guys making crude remarks about women and about, what's hot and what's not, and bodies and things like that. And I think, unfortunately, in our culture and even in the church culture, that you hear that more than you hear how to respect a woman and how to value who they are and not what they wear and not what's on them and not over-sexualize them. I don't care if it's a video game, a song, it's constantly there, everything. I mean, you can't watch a show nowadays and there's so many inappropriate scenes. I mean, it's everywhere. And so absolutely. And again, I don't mean that against my church, but that's everywhere. And so you can teach a girl to be modest all day long. I can be modest. Somebody can still be looking at me in lust. And so, of course, you have to address both sides. But, yeah, I think definitely we're lacking. And, you have a lot of people now raised by single mothers. And these guys, they turn to the internet and they turn to whatever. And they just pick up the culture. They pick up the lingo and they want to be cool and they want to be whatever. And then they step in here and it's all wrong. It really is all wrong, because you should value your bride and you should value a woman and things like that. And it's not quite the same. So I think you have to try and change that culture, and that starts with the men in the church. Unfortunately, I feel like there's less and less that step up. I know with my kids, there's not too many that step up and teach my guys how to be men of God. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, that's something that definitely has to change in our culture, because, like you said, I mean, it's mostly all geared towards women.
Well, but at the same time, in saying that, the culture that we live in is instant gratification.
Right.
So everything is at our fingertips. You know, as kids, our nightly thing at my house was to watch my wife and kids at the same time every night with my family. And so now, my sister-in-law called the other day and said, the kids were, one of our nephews was at the hospital, and he couldn't watch SpongeBob when he wanted to, and so he had to wait because Cable was in the hospital. So with instant gratification at their fingertips, it is a world that's overly sexualized, because you can't even read an article at the bottom without something with explicit videos popping up at the bottom. You get to the bottom and you're reading something about Jesus, and there's an ad, right there at the bottom. You're like, well, where did this come from? And so it is a culture, but I think it's going to be a culture that has to spread, starting with media, because media influences people, and people influence media. So it's got to be in unity, culturally based between the media and people, because media produces what people want.
Because even guys, again, we can be modest all that we want to. If we don't give you what you want, all you have to do is get online and get what you want. It doesn't really matter. And you even see big time pastors, and they're putting up pictures of their wives, and they're so sexy, and they're so this, and even the language is just it's just not honoring. And that's not against anyone. It's what you see. It's more of it's a possession. It's this is what I want, and it's not. You're not valuing anything sacred about who we are, and so, unfortunately, that's kind of the direction we've taken. I hope that changes for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing with a lot of times we'll hear church congregations, or we'll hear about modesty taught, but very, very rarely do you hear about accountability being taught. And that's a big one, because, as men, we're accountable. God created us for that role of shepherding our households, and for those of us who are pastors, shepherding our flocks and our sheep. But as a man, you're called to shepherd, you're called to guide, and you're called to lead. And so often, due to the instant gratification and realistically, spiritually just deficit and weak men, we don't teach that accountability out there. We don't teach that, hey, this is not how you treat women, this is not how you observe them, this is not how you view them. And obviously, we are visual beings. We do look at women, and God designed us that way, and that's a nice thing. But it's when it transgresses from an viewing to a intention, it's a whole different subject, and we don't teach that aspect. We don't teach that part falls on us. It doesn't matter if the girl over here is dressed immodestly. It's my responsibility. Scripture even goes as far to say, if your eye offends you, pluck it out. We don't teach that concept.
Yeah.
We teach, or if your hand offends you, cut it off. We don't teach that concept to young men. We teach young ladies, well, you shouldn't have to feel that way because she's dressed that way, instead of she can dress as she desires, because she doesn't even know what we're trying to teach her as far as the gospel. She's not even really saved. She doesn't just come to the church for the first time. She doesn't know what's going on here, and you've been here your whole life. You should know better. That's on you. You should be accountable for yourself and your own actions and the own lust and desires of your heart, and you should be able to cast those things down. And we know that isn't an easy fight for anybody realistically. That's just honest and truthful talk. But we are accountable for those things. When we go before the Father and the throne, we are accountable for those things. So I think that's a big issue.
Realistically, now we're honestly going the opposite direction. Now it's, if I'm a woman and you try to, I guess, rein me in any way in that form. It's like, you don't tell me what to do with my body and with what I wear, and I get to be who I am and whatever, because I think because it was so legalistic for so long, and now you have this movement of feminism and celebrating women, and so now it's like, don't you dare tell me what to do. And so even from our end, it's how do we reteach what culture is going against, and teaching them how to actually be modest women in heart and in appearance. Same as the guys, like we can't blame that all on you, because again, now we're going the opposite direction, and now we're becoming haughty women, which is also not okay. And so it's going
The opposite.
right. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to go in that direction either. I don't think you can really put the blame on either one. Right. I just think you have to teach those foundational truths, and tell the guys to turn away, and tell the women how to present themselves, as the woman that Christ called us to be. So.
Well, and peeling back another layer, is it okay if I speak?
Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Okay.
I was just going to jump to the next question, but
peeling back another layer of that, I also think that it starts in the home.
Amen.
There's a lot that goes on in households, in Man, we know a lot of people. We see a lot in our business, and we just know a lot of things that happen, sometimes in people's houses. And I think that with your kids watching you, with kids watching parents and how parents treat each other, how
Yes.
parents handle conflict, how parents speak to one another in conflict. I know, man, me and Justin, we go ham sometimes, but luckily we don't have kids yet. We have 2 dogs. Anyway, but we don't watch how we speak to our spouses. We don't watch how we speak to our kids even. Whenever they do something wrong, do we chomp them off? And then in turn, do they go and chomp somebody off? It's learned behavior that starts in the home. And so if we're not teaching biblical foundation, if we're not teaching love and what love truly means in the home, boys are not going to love girls, and girls are not going to love boys in the way that they should, in the way that, Corinthians says so. That's not something that is going to be even, covering over their mind with instant gratification, staring at them in the face with Instagram and social media. Literally, all it takes is a click to get what you need on the internet. I mean, on Instagram, I have stuff popping up all the time, and I'm like, dude, what is this? Like, no. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what. I'm trying to think of how to say this. It doesn't matter what the world necessarily says if the foundation is there, if that makes sense. If the foundation is there in the home, I feel like as they get older, they know where to fall back on when they do fail and when things do get hard, because they will.
Train a child in the way he should go, and he won't depart from it.
Absolutely.
So.
That's it.
So, kind of in that same vein of modesty, I'm just going to move through some questions here just for time's sake. We were talking about how women kind of, and especially with this, kind of get polarized, where the males kind of don't have to deal with their accountability issues. It more reports to the women in modesty. But I see that as kind of a running theme in a lot of ministerial aspects of women in church. So recently I'd seen something in regards to a famous woman leader who's written many books, a great theologian in my opinion, and she was just blatantly attacked. So another question that we received was, do you believe that women can lead congregations, can lead church, can lead ministry, can lead as leaders, whatever vein you want to go with that, but can women be leaders in the church? Anybody want to jump on that?
You want to start?
Well, actually, Brandon, do you want to jump on that, dude?
Well, yes, I am a rookie. From a standpoint of my personal opinion, I think that women can be leaders in the church, but I do not believe that women can be pastors of a church. That's just my personal opinion. So, what do y'all think?
Yeah.
Well, could you expound upon why you believe that?
Yeah. So, everything you see the man is the head of the household. You see that every time you look at a church in the book, in the Bible, you see that men were the leaders of the church. And so I think that if we're trying to be like the church of the Bible, we see that men are leaders in the church.
Okay. I can understand that concept.
Do you think, does that apply across the board for you? Do you think a woman can't be the head of a business? If you take it into different areas, do you think they can't be principal of a school or a superintendent? Do you think, you know what I'm saying?
That's a good question, and no, I don't think that.
So you're just
I think
speaking
women,
from that in the respect of church,
yes,
basically. Okay.
Yes.
Anyone want to jump on that? Or, because I can. I'll be glad to. So I have a difference in opinion than Brandon, and I'll just go through some of my reasons as to why. And that's a chasm. That's not something, we can disagree with different things and it still be communal as Christians and still love each other. But I do believe that women can both lead ministry. I don't think Brandon was saying they couldn't lead ministry. He was talking about as like a head pastor over a congregation, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So I do believe that women can lead in literally any capacity that a man can, because they were created from our rib. They're to be our side mate, our helping mate. So, however, although they're our help partner, the spirit that was breathed into them is the same spirit that was breathed into us, and that comes directly from our Father. It wasn't my breath breathed into woman. It was God's breath breathed into woman. So I would see them as equal standing to any man. I do see biblical examples of women in leadership in different capacities and different things. And, there's different theologians who can battle on different sides of that. And that's been an argument that you've seen church-wide for a really long time. But one of my go-tos when I go to that is in Judges, I think, 3 and 4, when it talks about Deborah, the prophetess, who was a great woman of God. She was a prophet over the entire nation of Israel. So God's chosen nation, he put a woman over it. Not only just a woman as a leader, but a prophet someone to speak forth directly. So she heard not only from Scripture, she heard directly from the Father in heaven. He spoke directly to her things in secret, and she would communicate that to the nation of Israel as she judged and ruled over it. And so that's one of my primary examples. Now, I will say this. I do believe that women can lead in those capacities. I don't believe that most women have a gift of pastoral ministry. I think it's rare in the church community. I don't think it's very common because of what Brandon said. Men are typically leaders in those roles because we lead the household, and that if a woman is in ministerial leadership, say even the prophetess Deborah, and this is where I kind of counter the fact that most of the theologians will say, well, in that day and time, she was the only choice. Well, she wasn't the only choice because her husband was equally as accountable to
Right.
the Lord. And he actually was the warrior and the head of the nation's army and also led the entire nation of Israel. So the difference is even though she was the prophetess, she still was subjected to the head and the covering of her husband and her household. When she went to go do something, when she went to go to battle, when she went directly to her husband. She didn't go to anyone else. She went to him and she submitted to him. So even though the Lord spoke directly to her, she still submitted to the leadership of her husband in the household. And I think it's a really difficult thing for a woman to do, or even a man to do, realistically. It's hard for me to do in my household because even though my wife is not the leader of our household, as my bride, I love her and I respect her and I respect her choices and her decisions. So sometimes I'll have something that I think is the right way to go with it, and I'll present it to her as my helpmate, and she'll shoot it down like like a kamikaze plane, no doubt. And sometimes I have to take that with a grain of salt, and sometimes I have to really listen to the wisdom that my wife's given me because she thinks these things from an angle and a perspective that I don't have as a man. So I think that even though it's likewise, it's hard for me to submit myself to her. It's just as equally hard as for her to submit herself to her husband, as it's hard for me to submit myself to the Father in heaven. So I think that's a hard alignment for a woman to walk, especially in a large ministry or a congregation leading over men, because it's hard for men, I believe, to submit themselves to a woman leader.
Yep.
I don't think it's necessarily.
I completely agree with that. I'm a woman youth pastor, obviously, and I feel like even with some of the younger kids under me, much less leaders under me, I think there's always a little bit of a struggle when it comes to leadership, correction, anything like that. When it comes to a man, I'm in agreement with you, Avi, because I'm a woman. I think that women can definitely be pastors. I'm also with you that you don't see it a whole lot. Most of the time, you see a lot of evangelists or people that go around and they move from place to place, and they kind of have their own thing. Sometimes their own ministry, but not necessarily their own church. And they speak and they do those types of things. And you see that a lot more abundantly than you'll see somebody who's actually pastoring a church. But I think it comes back to what you said, which is accountability. And that even happens, in my opinion, with a man. Nobody should be so far at the top that you're not accountable to anyone. And
Yes.
I feel like when you have a board, like we do, or some people have elders, deacons, whatever, when you're accountable to another group of people who are the head and who can help guide you and make better decisions and things like that, I don't think it would be a problem. But again, with you, those giftings are rare. As far as that specific type of leading a church, even just leading a ministry is much different than leading an entire congregation.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so I think that is a really rare thing for a woman. I've definitely seen it done, and I've seen it done well.
Yes.
And I've seen it done respectfully and biblically. But realistically, you can't ignore it. I think you will always have that struggle. I think you will always have, especially right now, nothing against them, but especially with an older generation.
Yeah.
You're going to see a lot more women, take the pulpit, I think. But I think you're always going to have that power struggle because they are used to being the head, and we are used to submitting. I mean, that is our role,
It is.
like you said, in other ways, and that is really hard to be pastor 1 second and be submissive the next second, because that's not natural. It's you usually got to be one or the other, so that's hard. And I know that's especially hard with two in ministry that are trying to operate together, that at different times are both pastor and are both trying to submit. that's got to be difficult.
and
But I definitely do agree that women could be pastors.
Oh yeah, we
And I wanted to clarify too, so when I was mentioning, and I know scripturally speaking, because someone I'm sure out there, some theologian's going to be like, well, he said he submitted to his wife, and that's unbiblical. And I just want to jump in before that even gets stirred up and be like, so although I said submitted to my wife is also in the covering of the Father. I'm also, the scripture foundation is that, the Christ resides over the man. In the household, the man resides. That's kind of the whole umbrella system you see in all the depictions when it talks about the correct household. And that's accurate. But when I'm inaccurate and she's submitting to the Father and she speaks from the Father to me, I submit to the Father through her, just as she submits to the
Good.
Father in me. So I wanted to clarify that before anyone kind of jumps on some deep theological train that's kind of inaccurate there.
We're ready to take you. Kane, any thoughts?
Brandon, you want to jump back in, dude?
I do want to, before people start scolding me online,
Oh, no.
I do. I don't want people to think that I'm saying that women should never be be a head of the church. I'm just saying that, in my personal opinion, that I don't think they should, but can they? Absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
I think they can. I think they can do it well, and I think it'll be honoring to God. But
Yeah, I don't think it's that you're not supportive if that were to happen.
You definitely
I'll be
minister.
absolutely. I'll be absolutely supportive.
It's just
of it.
that's your own conviction, and that's
Yes.
how you view that tier, and that's okay. We all have our different opinions, for sure.
Well, and I'll say
Nobody
sorry.
roast Brandon online.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody jump on Brandon.
He's
Not,
new.
not for that anyway.
Um,
No, I'm kidding.
I mean, Brandon, I'll be real with you. I grew up in a Baptist. I grew up Baptist before I became Pentecostal. And I grew up with the idea that men were pastors and their wives were their helpmates, and men were supposed to be the pastors of the church. And I believe now, through study, reflection, and just personal experience, that women are just as qualified to lead a church. But I believe that God designed the church to function like he designed marriage to function, where the men were caretakers of their women.
Yep.
And I believe that while women do things just as efficiently as men, and they are just as able to do everything that men are able to do, I believe that, I'm trying to think of the way to say this, it's not incredibly, because it is a trying time where, it can come off as sexist, and that's not my intent, because I'm not. I believe that women are our equals, and I believe that women can do everything that men can do.
I agree
But
as
that
well.
doesn't mean
I
that they
agree.
should either.
But that, like you said, I believe that when you see women as pastors of a congregation, it's because the man that God has called has not stepped up appropriately. And I believe that you see examples of women being used in the Bible mightily, where there may have been a man that could have done it who didn't step up. And God's like, I'll show you. And called women. And women have done some of the mightiest things in the Bible. And I mean, that's why in Hebrews 11, where it talks about the great people of faith, there are women listed in that chapter.
Yes.
And if they weren't great, if they didn't do what God called them to do, they wouldn't be there. But there is a reason they're there. Out of all the people in the Bible, there is a reason women are listed there. So I believe that women can do and are able to abundantly do the calling of God and leading. But I feel like if that's what God has called you to do, you should seek after it. But I believe that we should also honor tradition at the same time. So I'm kind of I won't say I'm on the fence, because I do feel that women can and women should be able to. If God is calling a woman into a pastoral role, then please, by all means, go do it. Follow your calling if that's what God has called you to do. And that's ultimately where I stand.
Sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I have two things. One, because I've heard several of us say it, women can obviously do anything that men can do, whatever. But I don't think that always means that we should. I think we've proven at this point as women at this day and time, it's 2020. I think we've proven we can do anything a man can do. But I think some people take it a step further, and they come out of their role. And I'm very traditional in that way. It doesn't mean I don't think you can't run a business or you can't be the head of a church or you can't whatever. You absolutely can. But it was going back to what you were saying, at some point you still have to come back into your role as a woman, as a wife, as whatever. I absolutely think we can do anything that you can do, but that doesn't always mean that we should. Sometimes our place is somewhere different because I'm not supposed to be a man. I'm supposed to be what you're not. That's why I was your helpmate. That's why I was created differently, and I think differently because we all know we think differently and we act differently. And so I'm supposed to be something different. I'm not supposed to be exactly like you and do all the things that you could do, or God wouldn't have created me. He would have never created women. He would have just made men. And then the second thing was a question, and I'm blanking. You said, nope, I don't remember.
Okay, that's no problem.
Might go back at some point.
Yeah. Just to kind of pull time here, we're going to do a few more brief moments, and go ahead.
Yeah. So, as a woman with a type A personality, it was very hard. In an effort of transparency, it is hard to. It has been hard, even in our marriage, just to submit to Justin. Not because he is, not a good man or anything, but just because I'm a whole lot of a woman. I grew up with a bunch of really strong women, and having that, idea of I can do anything, I can be anything, I can whatever. I do run my own business, and I do head up a lot of different things, and it's very hard. And it has been, that's something that we definitely have struggled with, when we first got married, was just the submission part. To be able to release that and to trust my husband, to know that he's got it handled. I am called into pastorship, not lead pastorship, but to pastorhood and pastorship in the church as his spouse. And that looks different for the both of us. We do a lot of different ministry separately and ministry together that requires pastorship and it requires that gifting. And to come together and we had to learn how to pastorship together, which required me to sit back sometimes and say, here, I submit to you. I trust you. You are the leader of our household. Here, take it. And a lot of times, I know, Justin, I agree 110% with what you said, partially because that was a word that was given to us by some friends with Deborah, and I've just really been diving into Deborah in the last little bit. But, so yeah, just wanted to throw that 2 cents in.
and like you said, and it goes back to, and this is where I want to say and kind of leave us at before you kind of close out. So we've kind of discussed both sides, and we kind of are in agreement that women can perform in role of any ministry. However, that may not be God's original intent or will in different shapes and forms. And we talked about how rare pastoral ministry giftings are in women, and sometimes it's hard for men to receive that. Even for me, sometimes it's hard for my wife to receive my wife because I'm a pastor. So when she comes in and she says, "Hey, maybe your method's not going right now. Maybe you should relook at the way you're doing things." It really makes me step back and almost like, no, I'm right. And we're men. We assert ourselves. It's just how we are. It's pride. But I want to leave you guys with this because I think this is a theological thing that's been around for a really long time. It's a big debate. We're not going to solve it tonight, of course. But I think there's a different view on it that the culture is going to see and start shaping and shifting. And it's something that we do remarkably well here at Lakeside. And that's in Romans 16:3. It talks about a couple. Paul's actually just admonishing the Romans, and he's telling them of a couple that's coming to their church. So Paul is in prison. He's writing letters, and he says, there's a couple named Aquila and Priscilla. They're co-workers in the ministry of Jesus Christ. Receive them as you have received me. So basically, when they come to your church, you listen to them as if I were there standing in front of you. They are my dear friends, and I trust them, and I love them. I think looking at it as men or women running ministry is kind of half the story. Just like God created man in the beginning. He said, this isn't good for man to be alone. Let's create a partner. This partner is our partner in ministry as well. So I don't think a man should solely be able to run or lead. Now, my wife has pastoral giftings and leadership callings. Many pastors have women who don't have those giftings. That's not a problem. that they're still your support, they're still your help. You still lean into them when you struggle. And I think that goes back to some of these issues of accountability where men are taught we don't rely on anything. We can do it all ourselves, which is a whole different subject. Maybe we'll hit that next week. Maybe a good subject. But and among some other things. But what I want to say is that church, men, women out there, if you have a gifting, if you have a calling, don't sit it on a shelf. God will use you, and God will use you mightily for his name's sake. Now, the difference is in doing that, if you have a partner that may not be equally yoked in that sense, begin to pray for them. Reach out to us in Christ so we can begin to pray for them as well. Because if you can get a partner beside you that's equally called into ministry, even if your ministerial giftings are separate and different, they will catapult you further than you can ever go by yourself. Because it says here, and there's other examples other than just Aquila and Priscilla. You could go back to Deborah and her husband, the prophetess. They worked as a team. Where one may have one gifting and the other may have another, they shepherd and lead together. Even though that may be not one calling but two callings, they do it as a team, as a family, as a unit. And that's something I just think that the church really can receive. And, we can squabble about right, wrong, but if you have a man and a woman who are side by side, leading with each other in unity, you create a body of Christ that is strong. And you create a union and a covenant that looks more like the bride in Christ than I think the church tries to depict the husband and wife scenario, especially when involved in ministry. So I just want to leave you guys with that. Is it okay if I go and pray with you guys? Or pray?
Yeah,
all right. So we thank you for joining us this Wednesday. Hopefully this has been enlightening and fun, maybe a little different than what we do usually. But, the corona is different than usual, so we're trying to get out of the box here. But we hope you've enjoyed enjoying dinner with us and just had a good time. If you have any other topics, shoot them to us. Please go ahead and send them to us, send us our way. We can continue to do this if you enjoy it. We can move at different nights and things like that. But I just want to pray. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, God, thank you for who you are this evening. I thank you for all that you do for us and how you keep us. God, we talked about a lot of topics involving women tonight, involvement in ministry, and women in a whole as far as modesty, God. And I'm just going to pray right now that if anyone is being shackled in different ways, whether it's not being able to operate in their giftings or whether they're being shoved down in different ways, God, I'm going to ask that you release them right now, God. If there are people who are operating out of unjust hearts and are acting out of immorality and immoral places of heart and condition, God, I pray that you would just touch them where they're at. And, Lord, that I would pray that anyone that may have a haughty or self-righteous spirit about these things, Lord, that you would just begin to break that with your yoke of easiness, God, that your burden is so light that, Lord, we should lead with love and not with legalism, God. We should lead with compassion in consideration of those around us, even if they may view or disagree or see things differently. Hopefully some women out there this evening have been edified and lifted up in their giftings and their callings, God, and maybe they have been shackled in previous seasons. Lord, I pray that their husbands, their spouses, their partners understand that they have a calling of God on their life and is able to release them right now to begin to sow seeds and use the gifts and utilize the things that God has planted for his kingdom. Because just in the same sense that you give us gifts, it's just as unfair for a husband to shackle his wife with gifts, to hold her down and not allow her to reach her potential or calling in the kingdom for his name's sake. So I pray that in Jesus' glorious and precious name. Y'all all have a blessed week. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.